Hey everybody, and welcome back to Digital Sleepover. We are so happy to have you with us for another deep dive.
Yeah, it's great to be back. If you're new to the channel, be sure to check out some of our past deep dives. We cover a lot of fascinating stuff, and we always have a lot of fun.
Totally. We do. And today we're going to be diving into something that I think pretty much everyone who's listening can relate to.
Hmm.
That tension that exists between our increasingly digital lives and that very real human need for genuine in-person connection.
That's right.
So we'll be kind of looking at, you know, how the ways that we use technology and the time we spend online maybe are shaping our social lives, and also how they're maybe impacting feelings of loneliness.
Right, exactly.
And, we want to try and understand this balance a little bit better and maybe even offer like a few kind of practical tips or ideas for how you can foster more meaningful in-person relationships, even amidst, all the noise and the constant buzz of the digital world.
Yeah, 100%. Because, the digital world is not going anywhere.
Right. So the better we can equip ourselves to navigate it well and to, prioritize the things that are really going to help us thrive, I think the better off we're going to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so let's start with, I think, the first thing that comes to mind, which is, we talk about this idea of digital overload, but what does that even mean? Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, yeah, it's become a bit of a buzzword, but I think it's actually pointing to something very real. And, I think it's more than just the raw amount of time that we spend on our devices or online. It's also just this constant inundation with information, the pressure to keep up with, all of our different social circles online, and this feeling of sensory overload that can come from just, all of the apps and the platforms that are all vying for our attention at any given moment.
Right.
And I think the interesting thing is that, a lot of us, I think we go online and we spend time on social media because we think it's going to make us feel more connected.
And in some ways it does. It helps us to stay in touch with people who we might not otherwise, right? But there's a growing body of research that's actually suggesting that, spending too much time online can actually lead to feelings of greater isolation and loneliness.
Really?
Yeah. There was a study published in Psychology Today a couple of years ago. It basically found a correlation between higher screen time, especially on social media, and increased levels of anxiety and depression.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And they also found that this can also lead to disrupted sleep, difficulty concentrating, and even just reduce kind of face-to-face social skills because you're not practicing those as much, right?
Right. Yeah.
You're not interacting with people in person in the same way.
Yeah. No, that totally resonates with me. I know for me, if I've been glued to my phone for, too long, I actually feel more drained.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though I haven't really physically done anything, it's like my brain is just fried.
Right.
And I've definitely had those moments too where I'm like, oh, wow, I actually haven't had a really good, deep conversation with someone in person, for a while.
Yes.
And I start to feel a little bit disconnected.
Yeah. Yeah. That, I think you hit on something really important there, which is that the quality of our connections matters so much more than the quantity.
Right.
Right? You can have, like you were saying, thousands of followers online, but if you don't have, a small group of people that you can really be yourself with, that you can be vulnerable with, who you can, share the good and the bad with, it's just not the same, right?
Yeah.
And there's so much research that's being done now about how those genuine face-to-face interactions are so important for our mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's really interesting is that our brains are actually wired for connection.
Okay.
Right? And for connection in person.
Yeah.
We need that face-to-face interaction. That's where we really learn how to read other people's emotions. That's how we develop empathy, and that's how we build trust. And I think that's one of the things that's so challenging about the digital world, is that it can sometimes be harder to build that level of trust and intimacy online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that all makes total sense. So how do we even start to kind of shift this? It feels like sometimes these digital habits are just so ingrained.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it definitely takes some conscious effort and some intentionality to kind of shift those habits. But I think it's definitely possible. And one thing that a lot of people have found helpful is this idea of a digital detox.
Okay.
And when we say digital detox, it doesn't have to be something super extreme.
Right.
It doesn't have to be like you go off to a cabin in the woods for a month and you have no contact with the outside world. It can be as simple as just setting aside, an hour or two each day where you intentionally disconnect from your devices and you just focus on being present in the real world. Maybe that's the first hour after you wake up in the morning. Maybe it's the last hour before you go to bed at night. Maybe it's, during dinner time. Just finding little pockets of time where you can kind of create that separation.
Yeah. I've tried doing like little mini digital detoxes, like just leaving my phone in a different room when I'm having dinner or something like that.
Right.
And it really is amazing how much calmer I feel.
Yeah.
But also just like how automatic it is to reach for it.
Yes.
It's kind of scary sometimes how much of a habit it has become.
Yeah. It really is. It's something that I'm constantly working on myself. And I think, alongside the digital detox, cultivating mindfulness can also be a really, really helpful tool. Yeah. And so mindfulness is really about just being more present in whatever you're doing.
Right.
So it's not just about, putting your phone away. It's about when you are engaging online, being more intentional about how you're engaging, what you're looking at, how long you're spending, and when you are with people in person, really being present with them.
Right.
Right. Like actually listening to what they're saying, making eye contact, not, constantly checking your phone, just being present.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So let's get kind of practical for a minute. Like what are some things that we can do like right now, today, to start, kind of creating a bit more balance?
Yeah. Well, like we said, scheduling in some phone-free time can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And then I think it's also really helpful to think about what are some activities that you enjoy doing that don't involve screens? Right. And this is different for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's reading, maybe it's spending time in nature, maybe it's taking a class, maybe it's volunteering, maybe it's, just calling a friend and having a conversation on the phone instead of texting.
Right.
Just finding things that you enjoy doing that don't involve a screen and that kind of help you to reconnect with yourself and with the world around you.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like it's about being intentional.
Yeah.
I remember reading Cal Newport's Digital Minimalism.
Yes.
And he talks a lot about that idea of like being really deliberate about the technology that we let into our lives.
Absolutely.
And not just like letting it all just kind of wash over us,
Yeah. Yeah. Being really intentional about when we use it, how we use it, why we use it. And I think that can be really helpful in terms of just reducing the overall amount of digital input that we're taking in.
Right. Yeah. So and we mentioned earlier that human connection piece. Those face-to-face relationships are just so important.
Absolutely. And when you look at the work of someone like Brené Brown, who's done all of this incredible research on vulnerability,
Yes.
she talks about how, true connection comes from allowing ourselves to be seen.
Right.
Right, warts and all. And that can be scary.
Yes.
But it's also incredibly rewarding. And I think that's one of the things that's so beautiful about in-person interaction is that it allows us to be vulnerable in a way that I think can sometimes be harder online.
Totally.
And I think it's worth noting, we've talked about the research and we've talked about, some of the theories around this, but there are real people who are wrestling with this, every day and finding solutions that work for them.
Right.
Like, you look at, there are a lot of online communities that have sprung up around this idea of digital wellness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so people are sharing their stories, they're sharing tips and advice. And I think that's really encouraging to see that there's this growing awareness of the importance of finding that balance.
That's great. So, I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
If we had to kind of boil it down to like one key takeaway for everyone listening, what would it be?
I would say it's this. It's about making conscious choices about how we engage with the digital world and actively prioritizing real-world connection.
Yes.
Our face-to-face relationships with other human beings are so important for our well-being and for our happiness. And it's so easy to let those slide when we're, constantly plugged in and distracted. So it's just about being intentional about creating space for those real-world connections.
Love it. So just a little nudge maybe for everyone listening. Think about one small thing you can do today to intentionally connect with someone in the real world.
Yes.
Maybe send a text to a friend you haven't seen in a while.
Yeah.
Maybe RSVP to that event that you've been thinking about going to.
That's right.
Just, take a small step in that direction.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive here on Digital Sleepover.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we would love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Share your thoughts on this topic. Any tips that you have for finding that balance? You can find us over on Mitch and Vig social media community, and we'll catch you next time.
See ya.